welcome everyone. We're going to get started now. I know that people will continue coming in, but that's okay. We'll just pick up where we left off, or you just catch up from wherever you are. As you know, this is our monthly master class where I get to invite in experts that I'd like to ask questions and share that all with you, and of course give you plenty of chances to ask questions as well. So today I'm thrilled. Patricia Sung is with me. Patricia is a podcaster, motherhood and ADHD. And I know you're thinking, what does Duane want to know about motherhood? But actually, as parents, we discovered that we have a lot in common and a lot of questions and a lot of things that we had to figure out when ADHD is thrown into the family mix. And sometimes it's not a straightforward equation making all that work. So I'm excited to have Patricia here. Patricia is a serial entrepreneur, as I mentioned, a podcaster, former middle school teacher, which, as far as I'm concerned, means she's not scared of nothing. I've taught a middle school class just once, swore I'd never do that again. They're scary. So Patricia, welcome.
Thank you.
So tell me, first tell me about you and your family, and then we'll go from there.
Of course. So I am, like I said, Patricia Sung, and I host a podcast called Motherhood and ADHD, where I felt a call to support moms who have ADHD. There's obviously a big gap where we're still learning a lot about how ADHD affects women. And then as women grow older and have families, all of a sudden you have this whole new dynamic that comes in as we are trying to run our families well and be good moms. And it is hard with ADHD. So it perfectly fits in with what we're talking about today. My family is, I'm married to my husband, Dominic, he does not have ADHD, and he is quite the type A, very successful and very high standards. So we have a lot of good discussions there and how to make everything work. And we have two boys that are 4, and my oldest will be 7 in a couple of days. So we're still in the thick of sorting out, how do you run a family well, and how, like, what does that look like, and how is it going to come together? And wow, I put the question out to my community and said, like, how does this make you feel? What are, and we'll talk about more into the questions. It was like, man, I hit a nerve when I asked about this. So I'm really excited to dive in and get into what all the responses were, because wow, it was.
Well, okay, so I would be willing to bet, and this is just from my own personal experience. And of course, in our family, I'm the one with ADHD. And I know for the first 15 years of our marriage, I'll be the first one to say I was no help at all at home. I could not get my act together. And so it all fell on my partner to take care of, well, everything. What's interesting, though, is that wasn't seen as unusual. She was kind of just doing the stuff that other mothers did. And so I'm not saying that that's fair at all, but it seems to me that if you throw ADHD in that, this must be even more challenging for moms. Like, when you call out to your audience, they must be up in arms, like, why on earth? Why is it this way? And what? That's not fair. And I agree 100%. So is that true? Is that what moms are saying?
Yeah. So excuse me. I guess I should back up. So the questions that I asked both in my Facebook community and on my Instagram community, and said, okay, here's the questions. And first I asked, what is it about traditional gender roles in a family or a relationship that just drives you nuts or creates big shame feelings? Then I asked, like, what is it that is extremely frustrating for you? And then, of course, we don't want to just, harp on the negative, is that what's working well in your family. And we got quite the plethora of response. I mean, to be honest, I've never had so many people respond to question stickers in my story in the 2 years that I've been on Instagram. It was a flood. So I would say to like kind of pull together the theme would be that moms feel like we're supposed to be the jack of all trades. And when you think about jobs in the grand scheme of things, there are no other jobs on the earth where they expect you to be good at everything.
So I have to tell you this story. Okay. You will appreciate this. And you mentioned shame, and it came up for me. So the very first conference I ever went to at Adhd was in 2005. I saw Sari Solden speak, and you're probably familiar with Sari Solden, and a big, a huge name in ADHD in women, and I don't know if she invented it, but she's been in it since the beginning. And she tells the story. It was the whole subject of the title of her presentation, sheep shame. And she and her husband had moved out to the country, and so they lived on a farm, and they had animals, and so it was she was a city girl, so it was overwhelming to her to try and manage all of this stuff. And what was amazing was that she could feel shame for just about anything. And she invited people to come and visit. And before they were coming, she noticed that the sheep were dirty. And she felt ashamed that her sheep were dirty compared to sort of other farmers' sheep. It's like, how is it her job to keep the sheep clean, right? But it just, when you're the mother and you're supposed to keep it all together, you can take the blame. You can go out and look for stuff to take the blame for, right?
Oh, so much so, because when you look at most of the jobs of being a mom involve a lot of executive functioning. So we've got, things like scheduling and paperwork. And like, that's why I started teaching the classes that I teach, is so that we can get a handle on like scheduling and how do we run our day efficiently, because excuse me, we're supposed to be the ones keeping everybody else on track, and we don't even keep ourselves on track. So it's like the blind leading the blind. And like, that's where I started, like, how do we figure out how our day runs well? Because it's kind of the foundation. Because if we're not showing up to appointments on time, that like cascades through the whole day. And that means laundry's not getting done, cleaning's not getting done, we're not on time for starting dinner, which means we're probably running through the drive-through or ordering something in because we didn't have time to meal prep or start cooking dinner, so that we weren't eating dinner at 9:30 p.m. All these pieces of raising children and running a family are all high executive functioning skills, but yet that's where we struggle. So
right.
Yes, you can find the comparison in sheep, and you can find the comparison in any piece of motherhood. And I think there's a whole nother layer now where we see everyone's social media, and we see all of these like highlight reels of what everybody else is doing. I mean, there's a few, but most people aren't putting all those pieces of, here's my Mount laundry and, all the yucky parts that aren't coming.
Nobody's showing their dirty sheep.
Right. Everyone shoves the sheep in the back, put the curtain in front of it, and hope no one goes over that in that closet. So,
and then you throw the kids with ADHD in on top of that, and that makes it like it's hard enough just being a mom and getting all that stuff done. But when they forgot their homework and you were supposed to bake cupcakes, and they just pulled the thing out of their knapsack this morning and they're due today, and all of that kind of stuff throws onto it. It must be absolutely insane.
Yeah, and that is a lot of what was echoed in where we're trying to do what's best for our family. And then, I think it's like 50 to 70% chance that if you have ADHD, one of your children will. So instead of, your usual 5-ish%, that's a
Right,
huge
yeah.
jump. So now you're trying to manage all of that child stuff. Like, it's not just the usual kid stuff. You also then usually have, like, you're trying to deal with the school with IEPs and 504s and, going to therapy, whether that's speech therapy or extra tutoring, and all of a sudden there's 14 more layers added on every time someone else in the family has ADHD. That's just piling on. So it's a lot. And I think that's part of why I wanted to talk on this topic today, is just one, for everyone to know, like, you're not alone. This was across the board a huge thorn in mom's sides. So, and also for dads too, all the pieces of parenting that we feel like we're not doing well, the judgment we get from whether that's in-laws or people visiting your house, if you even let people in your house, keeping up those appearances and all the things that you should be doing. So even if you're doing the bare minimum, feeling like you should be the one volunteering to bake extra cupcakes or, sign up for the whatever volunteer thing.
We do like to people please, don't we? Right? We always, there's always this history of, well, I screwed that up, so I'll do more next time to try and make up for it. Right.
Right. Let me like make up for it so I can somehow do a little extra to make up for the fact that I was late to this or I forgot that. But then we're now adding more onto the to-do list that we weren't even getting the first part done. And so you end up with this shame spiral of, I didn't do it, so I try to do more, but then I can't achieve more. So now I end up with more shame. And it's just this like constant churn of feeling bad about what you didn't get done. And then comparing to what other people seem to do really easily. That's a huge issue too of, well, how come that mom can just juggle 8 kids and made home decorated cookies with tiny faces on them, and I can't even manage to go to the grocery store and pick up cookies with my one kid? I mean, it's a lot.
Yeah.
It's heavy.
Yes, it is. Okay, so how many of the moms voted that we should just switch roles and put it all on the dads?
Ooh, I should have done that. That would have been a good poll. And I think, I would say, at least a third of the comments had to do something with that concept of being the default parent, where carrying that mental load, whether or not we have enough toilet paper and all that, like, who's the one, like, if somebody needs to leave the house, that feeling of like, dad just gets to go, but if I want to leave, I have to check in and make arrangements and prepare dinner, and going through the whole like rigmarole of like making sure that nobody misses your presence.
Right.
But yet that feeling of that dad can just walk off and go, which isn't necessarily fair on either side to discount what dads are doing, because I did have some dads chime in, and where, whereas moms were like voicing their concern of like the emotional tolls and the mental loads and feeling that parenting is never done, on the dad side they were feeling like, and I wanted to ask you to chime in on this as well, of like most of the dad comments would lean towards like that stigma that they don't care about their kids, they don't contribute enough, they don't support enough emotionally, and that like discontent, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for, that like yucky feeling where if it's a dad who's doing women jobs, that's not an appropriate way to support their family, and looking down on dads who do the things like the cooking and the cleaning, even if
there's a lot of stigma around that, isn't there? Yeah.
I mean, I'd rather eat a delicious dad meal than a crappy mom meal, but that's not given value to dads either when they're contributing in that way, which is like, crazy to think, why would we not value everyone's contribution? I mean, that's why we're here talking about it, but have you had experience with that where?
Well, I absolutely have. And I've been married for 37, coming up on 38 years now. So there's been a generational change since the beginning, but I was subject to the same stigma. I grew up in exactly that household where mom was responsible for the house, and dad, you could tell when they weren't talking because dad was out mowing the lawn, or he was out painting the house, or he was out, he was in his workshop doing something. And mom was cooking and cleaning, and I don't know that either one of them was happy, but I do know that I very much, that was ingrained in me, so that when we got married, and it's funny because my wife grew up in the same sort of household on the other side. She was always interested when her dad was in the workshop fixing something or whatnot. She was always hanging around, and he would kind of push her out of the way and bring in the three brothers so that they could see, what he was doing, and so on. And early in our marriage, that was the whole deal. I had to do home repairs. I suck at home repairs, like really, really terrible. And Linda was responsible for the cooking. Like I can remember, we worked in a town that was about a 20-minute drive away. We worked together in the same school. She was a teacher, I was a teacher. And so we put the kids in the oldest one was in school near us, and the other one was in a daycare near us. Like, we just drove back and forth every day. And she used to flip out because there's four of us in the car, and driving home, everybody, Mom, what's for dinner? Like, I haven't been home either. We'll find out when we get there. Why is it my job, right? So we really get into the roles that we're assigned, and we try to play them. And it doesn't matter whether we're happy or not. And as a matter of fact, it's very often not the case that we're happy. And later on, we had to redivide absolutely everything, like eliminate all of those rules and find our own rules that work for us. And I think that's something that every family has to do. Families today are just, they're so different. Every family is different. Like okay, so there's a mom and a dad and a couple of kids, the what do they call it? The atomic family or something like that.
Nuclear.
But
Nuclear family.
Nuclear family, thank you. But not anymore. Any random groups of people form families all the time. There can be 3 or 4 parents, or 3 or 4 kids, or one parent and multiple kids, and vice versa, whatever works. But the rules have to be thrown out the window. Then you got to make what works. You got to figure out your own, I think. Have you guys figured out any of your own rules? Did anybody suggest any rules and approaches that they took?
Yeah, there were some really great suggestions, and I would say, if it's okay if we hang tight, I want to touch on the second question before I get into that, because it's really
sure,
one of the no, fine. I just wanted to kind of run through the background first, and then get into the solutions, because I will be totally honest with everyone. I do have ADHD, and I'm trying to keep up with this chat, and it is a lot for my brain. So I'm like, okay, let me get through talking about the presentation part, and then we'll get into all those questions, because I see good ones popping up, but I can only see half of them as the little bubble pops up. So
sure.
In true ADHD fashion, I hid the chat because I knew I wouldn't be able to have a quality conversation and read at the same time.
No, so, absolutely. And listen, I'll tell you what we can do. Listen, if you guys really want Patricia to see and answer these questions, if it's not just a comment, but as a question, could you put it in the Q&A? Because that way we'll check that afterwards and make sure that we're answering your questions and stuff like this. Somebody said, ignore us. There you go.
I have been so far. No, but yeah, if y'all would put that in the Q&A, that'd be super helpful so that we don't have to scroll through like 100 messages.
Right on. Perfect.
We get in. So, because, well, I did want to touch on one other thing is that, well, I guess two other things in this same concept is that one, no matter what side people were on, almost everyone with ADHD said that they had some kind of guilt for not pulling their weight, like quote unquote, not pulling their weight. I think that's
totally. That defined the first 15 years of my marriage.
And it's, you know, there's the joke about the ADHD tax, and I think it applies in relationships as well, that we feel like we're not doing enough because, again, that same thing we talked about earlier. Well, I messed this up, so I try to do more, but then I messed that up. And you end up with this, you know, hamster wheel of not meeting the high bar that we've set for ourselves. A lot of it is what we expect ourselves to do. And it's not always what our partner expects us to do. And we get focused on what we expect ourselves to do instead of focusing on what our partner would like out of us. And we'll talk about that later as well, where if we're only focused on what I thought I should be contributing and not what my partner values, like we're not really getting the bang for our buck there because we're so worried about these 5 tasks, and our partner will be like, you know what, I really don't care what X looks like. I care about Y. So if you know that you can put X on the back burner and focus on the other thing, that makes it a lot easier, but I'm getting my head of myself. And I think the other part in this, like not living up to our potential area, is that a lot of relationships, even though partners have genuinely like sat down and tried to not fit into that traditional role, whether it's because folks are in a like same gender relationship or non-binary couples, like no matter if you're a heterosexual couple and you've had this discussion and you have it all planned out, it's like still we feel pressure to live up to what society tells us we should be doing, no matter what the should is.
Oh, absolutely. Because as you can say, you can decide as a couple what's important to you, but then the mother-in-law is going to drop in.
Right. Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. That no matter how we come to that choice, even like I heard from a lot of stay-at-home moms who said, I chose to stay at home with my kids. I've chosen not to work, and I don't feel respected for that choice, even though that was my decision. And that whole layer of when we purposefully make choices and yet we still don't feel valued, and we still don't feel like we're doing enough, and we don't feel like we're living up to like that goal we set for ourselves. Again, there's a lot of weight there. So that part, I will say, it was hard reading all those responses to see how hurt and how, I don't know, is unvalued a word? Devalued?
Devalued, yeah. Unappreciated, for sure.
And that it was hard to read. And sometimes I was like, yeah, I hate that too. And then part of me was like, oh, like, this is heartbreaking. Like how many people feel poorly about themselves and not solidified in their relationship of how both partners can be working together forward. It was hard to read. And then we start layering on all the different extra stressors. So we talk about having kids with ADHD, or the tension of having a disability and feeling less than, or leaning more on your partner than you feel is quote unquote fair. Having the layer of interracial partnerships, like my husband is Asian American, and so all of a sudden you're layering in the cultural expectations that are not only maybe what I'm not living up to, but also that are different than what I was brought up with. So now you're trying to navigate that. When you have two working parents, when you added another full-time job or a part-time job on the to-do list, everything from stay-at-home moms who are like, people think I'm not doing anything, and then they expect me to take on more. They expect me to be the one volunteering and doing extra stuff, or like, hey, can you watch my kid after school because you're not doing anything? You're like, maybe I'm not doing anything. The higher rate of divorce in ADHD couples, the way that we're not taught how to excel in these roles. Like, that's why I teach what I teach, because as moms, we're expected to just know how to schedule stuff and know how to organize things. And when we don't, and we don't have a system in place, and we don't have a way that makes sense to us, like we weren't taught in a language that makes sense to us, how are we supposed to be successful?
And that's every ADHDer, I think, because it's not just moms. My struggles with time management and forgetting stuff, they're legendary. I mean, it's just horrible experience, because and I must have missed, like you, I must have missed the class or something where they actually taught you how to, manage time and show up on time to stuff and not forget stuff. And it just crazy how unprepared we are for a life with ADHD. I mean, even if we were diagnosed young and had help through school and whatnot, I don't think anybody's ready for adulthood with ADHD. It's just like craziness. Rick, you
Yeah, we had a question that came in through email, and I think it's germane, and it's not just people with ADHD. I think all parents struggle with this, but the question was, how do we practice more patience in the family when we come home from struggling from our own day and we're already overstimulated and grumpy maybe and all that, and then we come home to kids that are fighting and off the walls and all that sort of thing. We just don't have the bandwidth left sometimes. So how do we, I guess, strengthen ourselves against that?
Yeah, so I have 3 pillars that I always teach on when you're learning how to work with your ADHD. The first one is understanding your brain. You have to understand how ADHD works, but also how does your ADHD affect you? What is your recipe of ADHD? Because some people are going to have more struggles with working memory. Other people might struggle with the concept of time. Everyone's going to be different. So understanding how it specifically affects you is step 1. Then step 2 is put on your oxygen mask first. So how are you taking care of yourself? Because you can't take care of other people well when you're not doing well. And then step 3 is asking for help. So when we look at that scenario of, I am already at level 9, and then I come home and my kids are pushing me already at level 10, and it's not their fault because they're kids and they're loud and what have you. I mean, step 1 is know your ADHD. So just knowing that you're walking in the door at level 9 is a first step, because when you walk in thinking, a lot of times we beat ourselves up like, well, I don't know why that set me off. I don't understand why I was yelling. I just walked in the door. I'm already yelling at people, and we're beating ourselves up for yelling at our kids already. And we have this expectation that we walked in the door at 0 and all of a sudden hit 10. Well, no. You didn't start at 0. You started at 9. So understanding that we're coming in already sets the stage for more understanding. And then
absolutely.
Step 2, putting on your oxygen mask first, what do you need to do between leaving work and before you walk in that door to lower that level down? I'm not saying it's easy.
Well, this is going to sound really, one of the greatest things of moving to Montreal was that I went to and from work on public transit.
Mm-hmm.
And coming out of work and just sitting and immersing myself in a book, listening to music, whatever, for the 25 minutes that it took to get home, I walked in the house in a great mood. Didn't matter, I had left that behind. It was not the same when I was trying to drive through traffic to get home. That was just aggravating. So I think public transit and a decompression time, that's a huge tip, right? If you've got that option, take advantage of it.
Yeah, and the great part about ADHD is we are fabulous problem solvers. So when we step back and we know, okay, this is the problem. I leave work at a level 9. I got to be home in 20 minutes and hopefully be at least like a level 5. What needs to happen in that 20 minutes? Usually our creative brains can find a solution in there. And it might look weird to everybody else, and it might not be easy. It might not be easier to take public transport. It might take you longer to get home. But if that's what allows you to decompress, then is that extra 20 minutes worth it to you?
Absolutely.
Those are the kind of questions that we need to ask ourselves, because normally our gut response would be, no, that takes too long, I'm not doing it. But
and when really it's not a
gives you-
cost, it's an investment.
Right.
Because, right, your kids are not, no matter what they say, they're not really starving to death. Okay. If you feed them 20 minutes later, they will live. And if you get yourself from a 9 down to a 5 before you walk in, you won't kill them. So win-win.
Yeah, and it might look like picking them up from daycare and immediately going to the park and letting them run around for 20 minutes at the park or 30 minutes at the park while you sit quietly, when you're like, I know we have homework to do. I know we have dinner to make. But if that is what allows you to be able to have a calmer interaction, then that investment is worth it.
Absolutely. And I remember that the rule about coming home from school and you had to do your homework before you could do anything else. And by the time I got home from school, like, no, I needed to go out and burn off energy before I could even sit down to do homework, right? The rules that your parents used or that your teachers impose. I had a teacher who swore that the best way to study was 20 minutes on one subject, 20 minutes on another subject, 20 minutes on another subject. I just about failed that year. That's absolutely terrible for us, right? So the rules that people are imposing, like, throw them out the window. Solve the problem your own way, apply your own rules. I love that.
Yeah, it's hard to step out on a limb and say, I'm going to ignore the advice of many experienced and knowledgeable people.
Right.
But if those people don't have ADHD, are they really?
Or your ADHD.
Same, true.
Right. Because they don't have like your ADHD and my ADHD are different, and we're going to have different solutions to even the same situation, because what works for you might not work for me and vice versa, right? You could be the mom that just needs space alone and you can whip up a gourmet meal, or you could be the mom, like my wife, who would really rather not cook at all, right?
Yes.
So different solutions for different ADHDers and different families. Cool. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, Rick, are there any other questions before we start to get into what my community shared about what did work for them? Or should we jump into solutions?
Not for me. There are a couple in the question.
Yeah, we'll get to them after.
Okay.
I want to give some tips first.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have about 10 more minutes, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
10 to 20. Yeah.
So we'll run through what the tips are to share, and then we'll go into questions. I'll try to, again, my time counting is not good, but I'll do my best. That's why I ask lots of questions and have someone else keep the time for me. Okay, so first I want to invite everyone, if you have like tips that have worked for you, please start bombarding the chat with as many as you can. Share everything you can think of that works for you. We want to get, that's the beauty of this community time, is to get those ideas in. So I expect the chat to be while we're talking here. So first one is communication. That was personally, that's what works for my husband and I. It is not my strong point by any stretch of the imagination. I have so much of a conversation in my head that I think I have already talked to him about it, and clearly he knows the 45 iterations that I have gone through in my brain, and it is a concerted effort for me to have that communication with him. It is very difficult for me, but it makes a huge difference in how we function and how we are successful. And I will say the caveat of every relationship is different, and obviously if you're in an unhealthy relationship, you have a lot more eggshells to walk on and a lot more layers to navigate. So I do want to be sensitive to that as we explain these.
I agree with you 100% though. The communication is essential. And you want to talk about one of those relationships. Linda and I, in those first years, sure, we had some great times, but often we couldn't talk. There were subjects that we could not talk about without it coming to a fight. That was just, and the communication, when you're yelling, communication has stopped.
Yes.
Right. And it was Linda who solved this. She made me write. She wrote to me, and I read it, and I was getting ready, and she said, no, go write. And the nice thing about writing is it gives you time to edit and to say what you really mean, and to not throw in that dig about her mother, and to all of those
you did 7 years ago that really made me mad.
Exactly, and focus on what are you trying to accomplish, right? So I agree with you 100%. Communication is essential.
And being as honest as you can with your partner. Like, one of the examples I always share is when I was pregnant with my second son, my oldest was about 2, and I was one of the very unfortunate souls who threw up every day until I had him. So 9 months straight of vomiting. And it got to the point where I finally said to him, I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I cannot take care of a toddler and make dinner, because all smells make me want to vomit more, and keep up with the house. So you got to pick 2. Tell me which 2 are important to you. I don't think I can stop taking care of our kid. So you're going to have to pick either home cooked meals or keeping up with this house. I can't do both. Like, I am just too sick. I can't. And that conversation allowed us to say, okay, for him, living in a messy house is not an option. So that's the one we picked. And for the last 4 or 5 months of my pregnancy, we ate out a lot. We made really like the chicken nuggets and the pizza were on standby. Like, I did not cook for almost the entire time. And normally I love cooking. It's very hard to do when you have small children, but
Right.
It just wasn't feasible. So to have that conversation, he has ownership in it too of, okay, this is what I chose. I would prefer to have a child that's alive and a house that's clean. And, we paid for it in terms of the budget, but that made it so much more doable because we were honest, we were on the same page, and we both chose the sacrifice we were making at that time.
Right.
So that's one, is communication. The next one was self-reflection. It's just understanding what is it that you need and that you want, working on your own healing. When you're having those conversations, does it really warrant a shame reaction? Does it really warrant a guilt reaction? Or is that something we're putting on ourselves that we don't need to do? And that's, a whole can of worms that I won't open the whole thing, but understanding what we need is a huge help. So another thing that was shared is flexibility, understanding that 50-50 even balance is totally unrealistic, and knowing when you can handle more and when you can handle less, and having that give and take with your partner of, if somebody's traveling, I'm taking on more. Okay, now that means that when you come back, I'm going to need a little bit of a break, so I keep my sanity. And understanding how can you shift those responsibilities on purpose? So being proactive about it, not just relying on emergency maneuvers every time, which we tend to be quite good at often. Right. Is that we're great in emergencies and figuring out a last minute solution, but that means that we're being reactive to the situation and not proactive. And usually there was a better or less hurtful or more efficient way to do things if we had time to make a plan.
Right. Yeah, we'll always solve the problem, but it won't be the best solution if we do it in an emergency. Yeah.
The next one that people shared was considering your strengths and your interests. So our motivation matters. Every time I teach a class, we talk about motivation first because we are interest driven. And when we buy in and we're excited about it, then we will do more, we will do better. But if it's getting foisted upon us, like you can't tell me what to do and I'm not doing it. So we, like when we first got married, we ended up making a whole list. So like, here's all the chores and responsibilities that have to get done. And we divided it up and we basically like picked like dodgeball and said, okay, I'll take this one, I'll take that one. And that means that you're doing the ones that you like and the ones that you're good at, but also then both sides end up with jobs they don't want. And knowing that you're not the only one getting stuck with jobs that you don't want makes it a little bit easier. And being very clear on who's responsible for what. It doesn't just dump on one person. Somebody's not like the cleaner upper and just picks up all the edges, because that's where I think a lot of especially women felt like they were being neglected, is that they're the dumping ground for whatever else isn't getting done, mom will do it. So being very clear on who's doing what, that also gives your partner understanding of what you are doing, because a lot of times, you know, we're being the silent martyr when our partner doesn't even know that we're doing those things. So not to say that we have to be like, well, look at all the stuff I do, but they will appreciate it a lot more when they're aware. If they don't, you know, it's like out of sight, out of mind. I didn't realize that, you know, you were counting all that toilet paper, you know, rolls and watching the napkin level and all that. So all those little things add up.
Yeah, absolutely.
It definitely gives us a little more patience when we understand where our partner is coming from. Okay, I was like, I still got a few more. Okay, I'm going to speed through these so that way people can kind of.
Yeah, because we've got a couple of questions to get to, but carry on.
So accountability and body doubling, you know, leaning on your community to help you get stuff done. Outsourcing, 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 outsourcing. Anything that you can get off your plate that you do not like or not good at, try to get rid of those first. Robots was one person's suggestion. So like the robot vacuum, the auto bill pay. Anytime you can get a robot to do your stuff for you, that is outsourcing, get that done. Purposeful breaks, so planning when you're taking time for yourself. And then teaching your kids was the last big one. Of our kids need to have those life skills. They are part of the family, and as little as 18 months, they can be contributing, putting things away, folding washcloths, putting things in the laundry basket, putting dishes, like their own dishes, like the plastic ones they won't break, putting their own dishes away. They can be doing that at 2 and 3. So starting them young, and you are outsourcing to your kids. Everything that you teach them takes 100 times longer, but once they can do it, it's not on your plate anymore.
We used to make a game of laundry and matching up socks and stuff.
That's good. Well, they need to practice matching.
Right. So absolutely. And I mean, they were cooking supper. Each one was responsible for supper like as early as 10. And yes, you ate chicken nuggets and hot dogs on occasion and, you know, whatever, but they could cook for themselves when they left home, right? They were, so yeah, so that's a huge advantage. Okay, so I got a couple of questions here.
Okay. Shoot.
So what would you say to someone who wants to be a mom, but feels they don't have the right to bring a child into their lives when they can barely take care of themselves?
Ooh, that is a weighty one. Well, no one can tell you when it's time to have a kid. That is something that you have to decide for you. But also you will never feel ready to be a parent. At no point
Absolutely
are you
not.
ever qualified for this job.
If you only had kids when you were ready, the human race would have died out
A long time ago.
eons ago.
For sure. So one thing I think helps a lot is that when you are a parent, you don't have as many options for goofing off and procrastinating, and you value your time a lot more, and you have to get stuff done. And we do well with deadlines and pressure. So you have to feed your kid because they die otherwise. Like there's motivation there. There is, outside imposed deadlines there. So that part does help. But like I will never mince words, and like this is a really hard job. And if you are not comfortable with it, then don't do it. No one's making you do that. You have to be okay with the decision, because it is a forever decision. Even when they are 18 out of the house, they're never not your kids. So there's no take backs and there's no redos. So yes, you are very wise to take the decision seriously, but you will figure it out. If this is where you're meant to be and you're meant to be a parent, you will figure it out. Going in knowing that you want so well to do well, like tells me that you're going to be a great parent, because you clearly value what is important in being a parent. So I think that's one thing I've seen a lot of, where parents will like beat themselves up and be like, oh, I'm not good at this, I'm doing all these things wrong. But yet the fact that you want to do well says so much about your character.
And your kids don't necessarily care about the disorganization. You're fun to play with. An ADHD parent is a kid's best friend, because they have the coolest ideas. And even today, my daughters talk about how dad got us in trouble that time. And I mean, there's many times that and that's what they remember. They don't remember that dad forgot this or so your ADHD has strengths and weaknesses, and there's cool stuff that comes with it too. So okay, so that's that question. The next one. So here's a mom dealing with a husband who has untreated ADHD and conduct disorder as a result. In the case where there is almost an abusive relationship and willfully ignoring the ADHD that everybody else can see but you deny. Well, I'll let you say something, and then I'll say something.
I mean, I will preface, I am not a therapist. I don't have a degree in counseling or anything. So fair warning, take my advice with a grain of salt, just like you would anyone else who's a layman. But that person needs professional help more than what one person can do for them. That means like a full support system, not just their family, not just a counselor, not just a doctor. Like they need a well-rounded treatment plan, just like any of us do when we're dealing with ADHD. And that is not your responsibility to do for them. You cannot fix them. That is up to them. So my recommendation would be to take care of you, to take care of your family, and know that give as much support as your boundaries will allow, but you can't fix them and you can't do it for them. So it's a very hard balance to walk, but that's not on you.
And as you know, I was diagnosed later with my ADHD and realized that I had completely screwed up my life and had to do a lot. There's a lot of work. It's not easy. This learning how to adult with ADHD. It's tough. So I don't have a lot of patience for people who are like, hey, that's the way I am, love me or leave me. No, we all have to work our entire lives to become better versions of ourselves, right? So no, you don't just get to say, oh, that's it, that's the way I am, and there's nothing I can do about it. There's a lot you can do about it. So don't take that as an excuse. Don't let yourself off the hook with an excuse. There's a lot you can do, and your life will get so much better if you do it. So there's that. There's another question that came in. What do you recommend for PTSD trauma and ADHD? Any ideas?
I will say I'm not an expert in PTSD. I'm somewhat familiar, but I don't know that I would offer professional advice on it. I would say I would find a counselor or a therapist who is specifically trained in both trauma
Absolutely.
and ADHD, because they interplay so much with each other that to treat one and not the other would be very difficult and counterproductive. They have to both be worked on together. So find someone who you are comfortable with, but that is well experienced in both of those.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, anything that you're marriage counselors, you know, therapy for yourself, whoever you find as a professional to work with, they should also understand ADHD. You know, once I said, you know, every professional you work with should have ADHD. And of course, you know, somebody said, what about my dentist, my barber? Okay, maybe not, but
there are quite a few doctors and dentists that have ADHD. I would say a disproportionate amount. So you probably won't have as much trouble finding one as you think.
So, okay, perfect. Okay, anything else? Last things that we want to say to people here. I would say that it can get better. Whatever the struggles, there's more and more help available now, and it can get better. Moms for sure, and other parents as well could benefit from motherhood and ADHD. Listening to the podcast, you let Nan on there?
I have had some ADHD dads. You pretty much have to have ADHD to come on my podcast, but
Okay, cool.
In general, I mean, honestly, 90% of my episodes would help anyone with ADHD. I'm speaking specifically to moms. So, you know, keep in mind, I'll be mentioning boogers and poop and whatever comes with parenthood and minivans and what have you. That's part of the territory. But most of my work is relevant for anyone who has ADHD. Now, I just zoom in on moms because they're my people.
Right on.
But yeah, I want everyone to know that you can be successful with ADHD. It is possible. It is not easy. But when you surround yourself with a team of people and tools and supplies and strategies that make sense for your brain, then we can be successful. You want someone teaching you who speaks ADHD. And I would love for everyone here to come to class and learn how to plan their day and figure out daily rhythms and routines and find a way to make your day run well when you have ADHD.
And for all of you who would like to do that, but are not necessarily comfortable in a room full of moms, I'd invite you to come to Adhd. And as a matter of fact, here, I'll type it quickly in the chat. If you go to add.org/gift, you can get a trial of 2 months for free. Come on in, join support groups. We have support groups for beginners. We have support groups for more experienced people. And you name the community, they've got their own support group and meetings that I'm sure will fit your schedule somewhere. So I would invite you to do that. Patricia, have you got time for one last question?
As long as it's short. My husband's already giving me the eyeball, so.
Okay.
He's
So
my
I'll-
timekeeper, like I said.
Gotcha. I and my son have ADHD, but I'm getting less than hoped for support from my husband. What might we do to gain support from the partner who isn't willing to learn more, read webinars, conversations, etc., about ADHD and how it causes challenges for me and my son?
So I have an episode on that on my podcast.
Ooh,
Can't remember
nice.
which one it is off the top of my head, but I want to say somewhere, it's either in the 90s or the 100s. I think it was like 103 or something like that, where I specifically talk about this. No, I take back, it's in the 90s. It's like 97, I think. The short answer is you can't make them do anything. And it's about you figuring out what works for you and your child and you implementing it, and let them see it in progress, and they will join in eventually. It might take a little while, but you do what's best for you and your kid, and hopefully they'll jump in. But it is not their responsibility to learn. It'd be great if they did, but it's not by any means a requirement. We can't make people do that. But you can find my podcast on any like Spotify, iTunes, or what they call themselves now, Apple Podcasts. And I put my website there in the chat. So you can also
I just put it in again as well. So awesome. This has been absolutely fantastic, Patricia. You and I could, I know we could go on for another hour, but no, we're not. Don't ask.
Well, I know it's much later for you than it is for me, so I'll let you go.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Rick, did you
Thank
have
you so
anything
much,
you wanted
Rick.
to say? Thanks,
No,
Rick, for hosting us and letting us talk everybody's ear off.
Really honored to the old hostess. This is great, Patricia. This was a fantastic presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm working on becoming a grandparent for the third time, I guess. So,
Oh, nice.
so I have to go through the whole thing all over again, except this time I can just send them home when I'm frustrated.
That's the beauty of being a grandparent.
That's right. That's right.
Absolutely.
All righty.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Thank you.